VIII was considered to be one of the most vicious and influential rulers of not only the Tudor dynasty, but in European history. But yet, not many people know the true story of what Henry was truly like. He was a man with many titles and mannerisms. He was a husband, a son, a brother, a father, a ruler of the church and state. But he could not do this all by himself, as much as he would like to think he did. Behind every great man is an even greater woman. King Henry VIII is most infamously known as being the harsh ruler who got married 6 times. Not once, not twice, but 6 times. Their names are Catherine of Aragon, Anne Boleyn, Jane Seymour, Anne of Cleves, Catherine Howard, and Catherine Parr. Divorce, beheaded, died, divorce, beheaded, survived. It is time for their stories to be told. Henry's first wife was Catherine of Aragon, Princess of Spain. Being the youngest surviving child of the Catholic kings of Spain, she was betrothed to Prince Arthur, heir to the Tudor dynasty and brother to King Henry VIII, at the age of 3. After her unconsummated marriage to Arthur, which ended in his premature death, she was then betrothed to Henry, the new heir to the throne. Although Catherine was a little bit older and had been married to her brother, the two were very happy. Catherine gave birth to a healthy baby girl, but any other pregnancies resulted in miscarriages, and it was noticeable that she would not give birth to a male heir. King Henry now, after being crowned in 1509, had fallen in love with another woman, a woman who promised she could give him what Catherine could not, a male heir. But Henry could not just end his marriage with Catherine without getting permission. He needed to convince the Pope, Clement VII, of annulling their marriage. But he would not grant Henry's request. It went against the Bible and had no true merit to be annulled. The Pope also had a personal connection with Catherine due to her connection with Charles V, who controlled the Pope. But in 1533, Henry did the only thing he thought would fix everything. He separated from the church and declared himself the supreme head of the new Church of England. Catherine and Henry were now divorced, and their daughter Mary was deemed illegitimate. Anne Boleyn, the woman that Henry had fallen in love with, was the new Queen of England and Henry's wife. Quickly after getting married, Anne found herself to be with child, and everything seemed to be going to plan. Until, when it was time to give birth, she gave birth to a beautiful baby girl, Elizabeth, and she could not seem to give birth to any more children. Although she was generally not liked in courts and seen as a sexual vixen because of her being the reason for the exile of Catherine of Aragon, the people's true queen, she did try to do some reforms for helping the poor. But unlike Catherine of Aragon, Anne could not seem to get over Henry's affairs and became enraged, in which he would just respond in anger for his lack of a son. Their marriage was quickly falling apart, and Henry would charge Anne with false crimes of adultery, incest, and witchcraft. Keeping her composure, Anne was beheaded on May 19, 1536, and her daughter Elizabeth was deemed illegitimate as well. Jane Seymour and Henry were married quickly after Anne's execution, due to the fact that they had been seeing each other while Henry was still married to Anne. A year after their marriage, Jane finally gave birth to Henry's first son and his heir, Edward. Henry could not have been more thrilled, but all would not be happy for long. Days after giving birth to her son, Jane fell with puerperal fever, which is an infection that can occur after childbirth. She died 9 days later. Henry took Jane's death very hard and was noted for only wearing black for months to show the grieving of his beloved wife. Though not as liked as Catherine, Jane was known as being a joy to all, and Henry would not remarry for almost 4 years after. He was never quite the same. Anne of Cleves, a German princess, was King Henry's 4th wife and perhaps his most loveless marriage. Since Henry was considering her to wed, he asked a painter to paint a portrait of Anne and to not flatter her. He liked the portrait and wanted to meet her to wed. Henry was extremely disappointed, even having the audacity to say she had a face that resembled a horse. Henry insisted that he could not perform his husband duties because of her appearance. The two both agreed to an annulment, but Anne would stay in England with a huge settlement. Anne and Henry would actually become closer after they got divorced, even calling her a sister. Anne would outlive all of his other wives and even live to see the coronation of Mary I. Catherine Howard was Anne Boleyn's cousin and would soon face the same fate as she. Being the lady-in-waiting of Anne of Cleves, Catherine caught the eye of the now middle-aged Henry due to her flirtiness and silliness of being a young girl in love. The king would shower her with gifts and presents, and it attracted her to him. The two would wed in July of 1540. But as much as Catherine loved the presents and adornment that Henry would give her, she still loved men of her own age even more, being barely 20 years old and younger than Henry's eldest daughter. She was found guilty of adultery, which she was not innocent of, and was beheaded on February 13, 1542. But her only true crime was just being a young and naive girl. Catherine Parr, a twice widow and childless, would marry King Henry in 1543, even though she was in love with another man. Her duty was with her country, not her heart. She was a dutiful wife and loving stepmother to Henry's children and was the most intellectual of all of Henry's wives, which almost got her killed by a sickly Henry. Henry, admiring her, would name her military regent of the army and even would marry her off to the man she truly loved, Thomas Seymour. After Henry's death, she would go on to write novels on theology and intelligence that would become very popular. Her and Thomas would have one child, Mary, but childbirth would claim Catherine's life shortly after. After Henry's death, his heir to the throne was his son Edward with the deceased Jane Seymour. But Edward was a sickly child and would only make it to age 15 before he passed away, with no heir. But due to the new line of succession that was made, Mary and Elizabeth were now deemed legitimate and would be able to have their own aim of the throne, which they both would have a shot at. Mary I, daughter of Catherine of Aragon and the eldest of King Henry VIII's children, was the new Queen of England. But the only problem with her ruling was the drastic religious change that she brought about. England was mainly Protestant due to her father's Church of England, and she was a devout Catholic like her mother. She earned the nickname Bloody Mary after killing, torturing, and burning hundreds of thousands of Protestants out of the state. She left no one unharmed. She would later die due to unknown illnesses, and with no heir, her Protestant sister Elizabeth would take charge, much to her dismay. Elizabeth, daughter of the beheaded Anne Boleyn, is quite frankly the reason King Henry VIII's legacy is not in complete and utter shambles. Although Elizabeth and Henry did not have the greatest relationship due to the fact that he deemed her illegitimate and ordered the execution of her mother, she did not form herself to become bitter, but grew, unlike her sister Mary. Elizabeth would defeat the Spanish Armada, try to put a rest between the horrible wars of religion by being a politique, and help make her kingdom flourish under arts and culture. Elizabeth, do you think your father is proud of all you've done?
I believe your Royal Highness would be proud of what I have done, but it's hard to even want him to be proud. I know he loved me, but he made it seem as if my whole life were a mistake. He killed my mother and deemed me to be illegitimate, but yet I still want him to be proud. He is proud of me. My mother is proud of me. And although I may not have an heir to the throne and the Tudor line will die with me, it will go down in a legacy of honor and blood and pride. And I think my father would agree. I may not be a lion, but I am a lion's cub, and I have a lion's heart.
Henry VIII was known for many things. His 6 wives, his many mistresses, his inability to have a male heir, his divorces, his executions, his size, and his political breakups. But Henry would have been nothing without the women in his life, and he would have no story to tell for future generations.